How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and part 3 of my quest to determine if we can one-shot every single Elden Ring boss in New Game Plus 7. If this is your first time to the channel, be sure to check out parts 1 and 2, which I hopefully have linked in the description of this video. This is going to cover everything that we have not covered in those parts, basically the mountaintops and consecrated snowfield, Crumbly and Ferrum Azula, Deeproot Depths, and a variety of other different areas that I have not done yet. Oh, including Mount Gelmir, of course. If you enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like, a comment, or a subscription, and hopefully you like it. First on our list, we head down into the sewers to face off against Esgar, Priest of Blood. Being an NPC type boss, these guys don't tend to have a huge jump in HP or defense in New Game Plus 7 as we've shown so far, so I break out Exike's Decay, which is also helpful because he's got the 2 dogs in his room with him. Next up we face the Mog enemy that is, I think, an illusion. Not really clear on where that is situated in the gameplay mechanics. Either way, I'm sure there's a couple of ways that we could defeat him. We do have access to Mog Shackle, and I decided to break out the Rock Blaster sorcery because I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot of Beam type and Meteorite type one-shots in this episode. I decided to travel to Mount Gelmir next, and of course I had to take the teleport trap in the basement of Raya Lucaria, where we face off against 2 Abductor Virgins. Needless to say, these guys are incredibly weak to lightning, and one of them also is on water, the second one that we kill, so we're able to easily clear them using the ancient lightning spear Ash of War. Got a couple of Kindred of Rot enemies, which are not really a boss per se, as a lot of bosses in Elden Ring are. Either way, these guys have very low defense and a pretty big weakness to fire, so we don't even really stack up all the available buffs that we can, and Taker's Flames from the Blasphemous Blade is more than enough to one-shot both of these guys. Our first of the 2 demi-humans that we face off here on the mountain is Margot, not sure how you pronounce her name. Either way, we're able to show off a new Ash of War I haven't used yet, which is the Flame Split from the One-Eyed Shield, which actually clears 10k damage, owing to the demi-human's somewhat weakness to fire. We have another Red Wolf, this time in a Hero's Grave, so even though I messed up the one-shot in the Academy, this should put to bed all doubts that a one-shot against these type of enemies is not possible, as we do have to make some creative dodges, and we actually have to hit the wolf with the sword part of the Ash of War in order to get the one shot here, but it's more than enough to take him down. Fun fact about the full-grown Falling Star Beast is if you take the Spirit Spring up and hug all the way to the right, he actually won't aggro to you, which allows you to kind of get behind him and get all your buffs going, which is what I did here. And again, these guys at this stage have quite a bit more HP than the one in the tunnel that we were able to one-shot earlier in part 2 with the explosive Ghost Flame sorcery, so I had to break out Comet Azure. Another Magma Wurm, and luckily for us, these guys take quite a bit to get over to you. They're rather slow on ground, so a Meteorite of Estelle is more than enough to take him down as well. Next up is probably my favorite one-shot of Mount Gelmir, and that's because we're using the Noble Presence incantation. Again, a new incantation or sorcery we haven't used yet in either part 1 or part 2, thanks to the fire weakness that the demi-humans have, and the ability to boost this incantation further with the Godskin Noble set. We do 14,000 damage, and that's no problem one-shotting these guys. Seeing as we just used the Noble Presence incantation, I figure it's a good time to pop into Volcano Manor and take down the Godskin Noble himself. This time I also went back to the Eohed's Dancing Blade, which I think that is actually closer to how it's pronounced. But we're able to use Soul Stifler, and because obviously these guys are so weak to sleep, we're able to one-shot him as well. Here we are fighting the final boss of the area before the Shard Bearer, Praetor Rykard, and this is the Ulcerated Tree Spirit. Of course, many people have killed this enemy because he drops the hidden Cerulean tier, which makes a lot of these one-shots possible. And again, we fought these guys so many times. This one's actually a little bit weaker than the one, I think, in the Radon area, so a Burn of Flame fully charged incantation is no problem. And finally, Mount Gelmir's Shardbearer Praetor Rykard. I have this video for part 1 up on my channel as well, so you might have seen this fight already. We are able to clear his phase 1, but let's talk about phase 2 while I have my fight going on in the background. So phase 2 has over 100,000 HP. I think it's like 106,000. Don't have the exact number in front of me. Phase 1 we did just over 57,000 damage, 57,116 to be exact. And I don't have every single buff active, or at least as many as there are possible. So the things that we're missing the Canvas Talisman, the 4% incantation boost, both the Mushroom Helmet and Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, which when combined, being poisoned, you get 20% each, so a total of 44% extra damage. And there's also the Ancestor Spirit's, his Remembrance Weapon art, which does, it's a Power Shred debuff, which gives the enemies a minus 15% damage absorption. Not 100% sure if it's a straight 15% increase that enemies take, or if it messes with the damage calculation number. Either way, if we combine that 57,116 with the 1.04 and 1.44 damage multipliers, and we assume that the 15% damage absorption is a straight 15% increase to damage taken by an enemy, we get just under 100,000, 98,367. My guess is it's probably a little bit different, but I don't think that in theory that this one-shot is possible. If anybody has, if anybody wants to try, and you post the video, be sure to leave it under the pinned comment below. I would love to see it happen, but unfortunately, without any of the pre-DLC, without any of the DLC possibilities that might come along with it, additional damage boosting or what have you, I don't think that this one is possible. Well, despite the fact that that's our first enemy that can't be one-shot, at least in Phase 2, let's not let that stop us from continuing our journey, and I figured it's high time that we head underground and start the Ronnie questline stuff. We actually have back-to-back Dragonkin soldiers. This one is the Dragonkin soldier of Noxtella, and the Dragonkin soldier in the Lake of Rot. Both of these guys, we've fought the one down in Shofra in part 1, and these guys both fall in very similar fashions. Our first Estelle of the run is underground, and this one I got a little bit lucky with some of the positioning, as I'm sure you can see from the fight. And I figured it was thematically appropriate that we use the Meteorite of Estelle to take down our first Estelle. We faced a number of dragons so far, and Adula is a little bit different because he has to actually phase into the plane of existence from wherever he was hiding, and that allows us plenty of time to get some heavy damage before he even starts any of his attack patterns. So despite him having, I think, the highest HP out of any dragon that we faced so far, I think he was probably actually the easiest one-shot. And our final boss of the plateau here in Liurnia is Ringleader Electo, and I know she's a very difficult fight. I have plenty of trouble fighting her in my normal playthroughs, but turns out, like all Black Knife assassins, an Unendurable Frenzy staggers her on every hit, so that makes this fight pretty much a complete joke. There's only a few bosses in the Deep-Root Depths, and I actually did these a little bit out of order than I originally planned, which is why you'll see I have the 3 fingers embrace, the finger marks or whatever, on my back in the Deep-Root area, but in some of the upcoming areas I don't. Either way, the first Crucible Knight, Siluria, he goes down to a Crystal Torrent. I think this next fight is probably our longest so far, and I think the second or third longest that I took on any boss in any Part 1, Part 2, or Part 3, and that's Fia's Champions. Again, similar to Black Knife assassins, these guys are NPCs, and they stagger every time they're hit with basically anything, except for the pumpkin head guy. But once you break down his poise through his Endure skill, it's no problem, and Unendurable Frenzy is able to take down everybody in this fight with really not that much issue. Our last boss at the Deep-Root Depths is Lich Dragon Fortisax, and this one's a little bit annoying because whenever you enter the Deathbed Dream, from what I can tell, all of any of the temporary buffs that you have, they actually run out. So if you want to buff for this fight, you actually have to do it once you phase into the fight itself. And I think this is the first time that I've used Exalted Flesh, which gives you percent damage increase. It's not the highest that you can get. I think the Blood Boil aromatic is a little bit higher, but that's what I had on hand. So it is what it is. This fight's a bit chaotic. Only took me a couple tries, but avoiding the death clouds from the death lightning can be a little bit annoying. We make our way to the Grand Lift of Rold, but we stop by the Fell Twins fight first. This fight's actually deceptively difficult. These guys have more HP than you would think. So I tried a couple of melee attempts on them, couldn't get it to work, so I just went back to the old classic Meteorite of Stone. We have the penultimate Knights Cavalry of the run, and this one I think was actually the easiest one-shot that we did, because it turns out if you stand on this spot, up on this overturned pillar, he can't actually do anything to you. He can't hit you at all. He likes to jump around a little bit more than some of the other guys, though, so I went to Unendurable Frenzy as opposed to using like Meteorite of Estelle or Crystal Torrent here. But even though we didn't use Crystal Torrent for the Knights Cavalry, I went back to it for the Black Blade Kindred. This guy is also a little bit easy to get some early damage because he also has the phase in, which seems to be a pretty common theme for some of these late game bosses. We make our way to the mountaintops of the Giants, and our first boss here is an Ulcerated Tree Spirit. I actually went to Aguil's Flame here. I wasn't expecting this to actually one-shot the boss, but thanks to its very good turning radius whenever you're in the air, we get a little lucky, we avoid an attack, and we take him down in one shot as well. You know, a lot of my favorite one-shots in this video series has been on Deathbirds and Deathrite Birds. Well, here's another. I didn't think that I was going to be able to do something like this, and I'm sure not a lot of people even really have used this before, but the Regal Omen Baron does 100% holy damage, and if you put on the Dung Eater set, you actually get a boost. I think it's 5% per item. I don't wear the helmet, but it's more than enough to clear them with a couple of wraiths to spare. Now, this Tibia Mariner doesn't actually have an HP bar that pops up like a boss, but everywhere I could find still lists him as a boss, so I decided to take him on. Plus, he gives you a death root upon defeat, so we just go back to Placax Rune as opposed to doing some holy damage, because we've seen a couple of these guys be very tricky to try to one-shot if we're using like Radagon Rings of Lights or something. We have Commander Nile here in Castle Sol, and I just decided to go with an easy one-shot here because he's got his two Banished Knight summons that he uses, so getting in close and doing something other than using like Comet Azure is kind of difficult, so that's what we went with here. Borealis is very, very annoying, and while he was not the boss that took me the most attempts, he certainly took me a number of tries, because I'm not exactly sure where his plane is, where he spawns in. So this is one of the first times I think that you'll see me wear the Mushroom Crown, and you'll see me wearing that a lot more in some of the boss fights yet to come, because it is quite a bit easier to proc those than Blood Loss and have the fight kind of continue in a way that makes a one-shot easy. I talked about Fia's Champions being one of the longest fights. Well, this right here, the Spirit Calling Snail, I think was the longest fight, and that's basically because it's two boss fights and then a little mini-boss at the end in the snail. And this was really the first time I got a good look at what the snail looks like, as you can kind of see towards the end of the fight. I would say he definitely resembles more of a snake than a snail, but I don't know, that's just an interesting observation. I talked about it with Esgar, but NPC type bosses, again, they don't have too big of an increase in health and defense in higher New Game Plus cycles. Not to say they're not annoying enemies, they are, but for Commander Vike, I just went back to Placax's Rune because the NPC bosses get knocked over whenever they're hit with that initial attack, and owing to its large spread, it's very difficult for NPCs to dodge roll out of it. I believe this is also the penultimate Erdtree Avatar fight, and I wanted to see if I could continue using the Surge of Faith Ash of War to one-shot these guys, and yes, indeed, this one is a clean one-shot as well. And our last boss before the fire giant is another ancient hero of Zamor. Just went back to Agil's Flame here because these guys, if you've ever fought them, they like to dodge side to side. But again, this is one of the best incantations for tracking down those enemies, as it really has tight turning radii whenever an enemy likes to shift to the side like. And our final boss of the mountaintop of the giants is the fire giant himself, and I definitely got a little bit lucky in phase 1 because my Commodore was still just clipping the hitbox on his leg, which is able to get us through phase 1 with no issue. Phase 2 is pretty easy. You can just aim pretty much anywhere on his body, and a Commodore takes him out cleanly. So that's every boss on the mountaintops. But before we go to Fair Missoula, I figured let's tackle the consecrated snowfield first. And our first one is Stray Mimic Tier. Again, I talked about this on the first Mimic Tier fight, but because I'm at level 713, this guy's HP and defenses are way higher than they in theory could be, so I just went back to the Wild Strikes on the Great Stars. And our final Knights Cavalry of the video series is the duo up in the consecrated snowfield. This one actually took me quite a bit, and you'll see that I only actually take down one because I was looking it up, and they have the same amount of health and defense spread between both of them. So I figured I'll call it a one-shot if I can hit him. I got really lucky with some of the positioning for this one as well. Thankfully, he jumped into me without hitting me, and his hitbox left himself right in front of where my Commodore was coming out. I talked about it with the Forbidden Lands Knights Cavalry, but it's very similar here when you're fighting Great Worm Theodorix. There's a ledge behind him that I had no idea about before starting this run, and that makes for a great spot to just spam your hyper spell of choice. In my case, I am just going with the Meteorite of Estelle because that's how I've killed a lot of magma worms here, at least in part 3. And since we're so close by, I figure let's go fight the Misbegotten Crusader to get one of the legendary armaments. He's not an NPC, but he also staggers pretty easily from the Placax's rune incantation, so I had that equipped, and that's what we went with. And our final Erdtree avatar is a Putrid Avatar. These guys actually have a lower fire resistance. It gets minus 40 compared to a regular Erdtree avatar. So, Surge of Faith, once again, we pull it out for the last time, and we're able to one-shot every single Erdtree avatar in the lands between. I think I talked about it last time I fought a Grave Warden duelist, but these guys throw off their cloak, which again, very cool, but it does allow you to get a spell off or an incantation off right when you walk in. So I went to Theodorix's Magma. I figured it was kind of thematically appropriate. We fought him just a couple of bosses ago, so let's use his incantation to one-shot a boss. And our final death bird, or deathrite bird of the run, is up by the apostate derelict here in the consecrated snowfield. I want to say out of all non-remembrances bosses, this is probably the toughest one in the entire game, at least for me. on my first couple of runs. It took me so long to kill him. Fortunately, we know that holy water pots exist, which I really didn't at the time of my first playthrough, and I figured it was only appropriate that we go back and get the final one shot on these guys of the run using that nice little pot. And here we come to one of the bosses that is a reason that this video took nearly 2 weeks to make, and that is Estelle, Stars of Darkness. It's mostly owing to the fact that you've got to dodge out of the way of some of his attacks whenever you walk in, and you can't have your blood loss or poison buff until you get really close to him, because it takes you about 15 seconds to run from the boss wall to the boss himself. Luckily, I got some good RNG with my Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike, and I cannot tell you how happy I was when this happened, because this boss by itself took me over 100 tries easily. And I figured because there is a waygate that takes you to the Mogwin Palace, I figured this was the best place to put Mog, Lord of Blood. This, I remember, being my first one-shot that I ever did, because this is a incredibly difficult boss for me the first time I played through the game. So I looked up how to beat him, and I saw a lot of people talking about using Commodore and a bunch of buffs. That's what I did. Here, I'm just using Giza's Wheel, because he is incredibly weak to blood loss, and that's what I did, and we're able to get the clean one-shot on him, thanks to Mog Shackle, and again, his very high weakness to blood loss. And finally, we make our way to Crumbling Fair Missoula. Very few bosses left, and we've seen a number of Godskin nobles and apostles that we've been able to one-shot. I wanted to see if I could do it without having a third one spawn in, so that's what I was able to do. With good positioning, making sure they're in a line, and using Commodore, we're able to take down this entire boss health bar with one cast without a third Godskin noble or apostle showing up. This was another boss that took me a number of tries. Dragon Lord Placidusax, I want to say he took me at least 40 tries, if not more, because of the way that I had to keep farming for various items, and luckily I got some good positioning here. He's got a huge hitbox, and my Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike is able to take him down while doing just shy of 40,000 damage. And our final boss here in Crumbling Fair Missoula is Malik, and I gotta say, the first phase of the Beast Clergyman is probably my favorite one-shot of the entire run, because what we do is we enter into the boss arena, we gotta make sure he sprints at us, we jump off to the side, use Placidusax's rune, which hovers you in the air, and if you do enough damage, you actually start phase 2 back in the middle of the arena. And I tried to get him both phases with Placidusax's rune, but he jumps around a little bit too much, so that was proving difficult, and I figured it was thematically appropriate once again to go back to a Frenzied Flame spell, and we one-shot both phases. Before we tackle the last 3 bosses in Landell, I figured there's no better time to go to Michaela's Erdtree, and our first one is obviously Loretta. She, like her shade in Carrier Manor, does her quick buff whenever she gets close to you at the start of the fight, which allows us ample time to get off our ADLS and the one-shot. And now Millenia, and unfortunately for Millenia, Phase 1, I just could not get it done. I tried a number of spells and incantations. I don't really have any footage for you. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have deleted so many videos, but I didn't. And, you know, it was a little bit frustrating. She likes to jump around a lot. You know, I thought maybe Meteorite of Estelle was going to be enough to one-shot her, but whenever she falls down, it seems like she's invulnerable to damage for a time. So I couldn't one-shot her in Phase 1. It did not stop me, however, from trying in Phase 2. And we actually make use of the Knowledge Above All skill from Gideon's Hammer, which I think is a little bit underrated whenever you're going up against a boss like this who only does physical damage. So again, no Phase 1, but a Phase 2 one-shot of Millenia. Just 3 bosses left, and our final NPC boss fight of the run is against Sir Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing. And this was another reason why this video took a lot longer to make, because I failed my first time. I got a one-shot with Unendurable Frenzy my second attempt, but I accidentally deleted that footage, so I had to run through the entire game once again. And this time I was able to use Inescapable Frenzy with a variety of buffs, and we're able to one-shot Gideon in New Game Plus 7 with one of the weirder spells in the entire game, but this one made me very, very happy. Face off against Godfrey and Hoaraloo next, and Godfrey, very, very easy. He likes to just kind of walk at you for a couple of seconds to start the fight, so using Cavalry is no big deal. Hoaraloo is a little bit more interesting, but if you fought him enough, you'll know that if you just back up a couple of feet before he tries his first grab attack, you're able to start firing off your spells, no issue, and we get a clean one-shot of both Phase 1 and Phase 2 in the fight. But for Radagon, this is the first time that we use any type of Spirit Ash. I'm using the Putrid Corpses because I don't think they actually do any damage. And of course, we all know if you fought Radagon before, he likes to do his spell parry. I've seen a couple of videos of people one-shotting him with Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike. I was not able to do it after my test upon test. This guy, yeah, I tried doing that for over the course of 3 days, probably close to 10 hours trying to one-shot him. So I finally decided, you know what, let's summon a non-damaging Spirit Ash, let's break out Comet Azure, and let's one-shot him that way. And finally we come to the Elden Beast, and this was also a very, 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 emphasis on very, annoying one-shot to try. Again, similarly, I have seen a video of somebody one-shotting him with Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike, but I think that was back when the Godfrey icon might have boosted that spell. Obviously it doesn't anymore. So I figured, again, it was very thematically appropriate to kill the last boss of the game with a Frenzy Flame spell in Unendurable Frenzy. But the most important part of this fight is that we have to beat Radagon first at low health and get our buffs set up in the appropriate fashion so that we're able to do enough damage before the Elden Beast swims away. And that's it. So in summary, over every single boss that we tried, we had Rykard Phase 2, Millenia Phase 1, and Radagon and Elden Beast I had to do in 2 separate fights. Outside of that, we are able to one-shot every single boss in the game in New Game Plus 7. I'm looking forward to the DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, whenever that comes out, because you know I'm going to try this. Hopefully we get some additional tools in there, so I can try Rykard Phase 2 and Millenia Phase 1. Maybe we can one-shot them, you never know. In past games, some of the best items, some of the best buffing items have come out in some of the DLCs, so I've got hope. I'm really hopeful that it comes out soon, and I'm hoping that we're able to get those, and I'm hoping we're able to one-shot every single boss in the DLC. So, again, if you enjoyed this video, thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to leave a like, a comment, or a subscription. While I let the end credits roll, I figured that there was no more appropriate ending to get than the Lord of Frenzied Flame, because we've one-shot just about every boss in the lands between. And I figured that, let's leave it in ruins, because that's what we've been doing all episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.